Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. We are going to dive back into Mr. Beat and his content today. Just a note, after I did my reactions to Mr. Beat's 10 best and 10 worst presidents, he actually reached out to me. Some people had shared with him my reaction videos, and we shared a couple emails back and forth. Very nice guy. I'm very appreciative that Mr. Beat reached out to me the way he did. And at some point, hopefully, we are going to do some kind of a collaboration if we can come up with a good idea and something we can do together. Maybe the next time I'm in that part of Kansas where he lives, or maybe just something we can do over the distance. But we're going to make that happen at some point. So if you're watching this, Matt, thanks for your support and reaching out to me. We're going to take a look at one of his videos that I think will be a lot less controversial today than talking about presidents. This is his comparison of Ohio and Pennsylvania. Now, born and raised in Northeast Ohio, I live 8 miles from the Pennsylvania border. With the exception of Ohio, the place I've spent the most time in my life has been Pennsylvania. I went to college in Pennsylvania. I was married in Pennsylvania. My daughter was born in Pennsylvania. I lived, let's see, about 8 years of my life in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania's got a special place in my heart. So I thought this might be fun and interesting. I've never watched any of his comparison videos before, so I don't know exactly what it is we're getting into. But let's go ahead and dive in, and I'll offer some observations as we go along.
Ohio and Pennsylvania, the Buckeye State and the Keystone State. Two neighboring Midwestern states and these United States. Okay, well, Western Pennsylvania feels Midwestern, but Eastern Pennsylvania definitely feels Mid-Atlantic.
That's absolutely true, and that's true in a lot of states, I think. Ohio's the same way. I live like right here. And, in Ohio, you get, the northeast part of the state, we're kind of the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. In fact, Columbiana County, which is the county south of the one that I live in, is actually considered part of Appalachia. And so it really kind of identifies more with West Virginia, Kentucky, and things like that. So, you get south of Columbus, and people have a southern accent. You get west of Cleveland and Columbus, and you're dealing with kind of very flat terrain. So Columbus, Ohio's very, very different from one part to the other. They actually talk a lot about Pennsylvania being like a T. You have Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and then kind of the central part of the state, and then the whole northern half of the state is very different politically than the two big cities are.
Heck, you could even classify parts of Pennsylvania as part of the northeast region of the country.
Yeah.
It's a crossroads state, really. But yeah, this video is about Pennsylvania and Ohio, and you know what? Both are crossroads states with easy access to so many great places. Both states sure do have a lot in common for real. First of all, both are part of the Rust Belt, a region of the country known for declining industry and rundown factories. Even decades after most of these factories have shut down, several cities in both states continue to lose population each year. Both are probably about to lose one electoral vote in the Electoral College.
And we've been losing, here in Ohio, we've been losing electoral votes since I've been alive, going all the way back to the 1980s, 1990s. It seems like every time there's a census, and for those outside the United States, every 10 years we do a census. So our most recent census was in 2020. And that census is one of the ways that we always have 435 members of Congress. And the electoral votes for each state are based on your members of Congress plus your 2 senators. So the fewest number you could have is 3. And then the most, of course, is California with 55. So that means California has 53 members of Congress and 2 senators. Ohio right now has 16 members of Congress, but we're going to probably lose another one. We used to have, I think, 23 electoral votes when I was a kid. But yeah, the Rust Belt, I live near Youngstown, which is, the perfect example of that. Youngstown, Ohio in 1930 was larger than Nashville, Tennessee. That's how big the city was. But we've declined since then, whereas cities like Nashville have grown. Youngstown used to have 130,000 people, and now I think it's under 70,000.
because the population of both hasn't grown much in recent years. Hey, speaking of the Electoral College, Electoral College. If a presidential candidate wins either Ohio or Pennsylvania, odds are they are winning the entire election. Ohio and Pennsylvania pick winners, baby. Pennsylvania picked the winner for all but 2 presidential elections between 1789 and 1880. Both Ohio and Pennsylvania tend to be swing states in recent years.
Yeah, in Ohio, no Republican has ever been elected president without winning Ohio. That's how important Ohio has been to Republicans. Now, Democrats have often won without winning Ohio. John F. Kennedy in 1960, Joe Biden in this past election are a couple of perfect examples of that.
Although Ohio seems to be more reliably Republican lately, both have 1 Republican U.S. Senator and 1 Democratic U.S. Senator. Now, the governor of Ohio is a Republican, and the governor of Pennsylvania is a Democrat. But the state legislatures in both states currently have Republican majorities. Okay,
and it does bounce back and forth. Before DeWine, we had, I think, another Republican, but before that, we had a Democrat. In my lifetime, it's kind of gone back and forth, very much like the country has. And when I was a kid, I know Ohio had 2 Democratic senators. We had Howard Metzenbaum and John Glenn, who was a Democrat, the famous astronaut. And Rob Portman just announced he is not running for re-election, so that's an open seat. And my congressman, Tim Ryan, who my sister-in-law actually dated when they were much younger, he's from Niles, which is my wife's hometown, is actually running on the Democratic side to try and win Rob Portman's seat.
Enough about politics. Let's talk about the Amish.
Lots of them.
Seriously, both states have a larger Amish population than any other state in the country.
Pennsylvania has the highest. Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which is right down here east of Gettysburg, is the highest Amish population anywhere in the world. The next highest would be Northeast Ohio, where I live.
Both are 2 of the most populated states in the country. Both have a very similar population density. Pennsylvania does have more people. Combined, both have 10 metro areas that are ranked in the top 100 of most populated metros in the country. While Pennsylvania has the 2 biggest metros overall, Philadelphia.
2 biggest metros, but not the 2 biggest cities. Philadelphia would be the largest city in either state, but that's the only one. In fact, I believe that in terms of the city population itself, Pittsburgh is actually closer to the size of Toledo. Now, metro population makes that very different. For example, Cleveland's metro population is the largest in Ohio, but Columbus has the highest population in Ohio. So it gets a little confusing when you deal with all of that.
Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Ohio has the C's trio of Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus, all of which are almost as big as the Pittsburgh metro. Both have similar climates. In general, humid continental in the north and humid subtropical in the south. Northern Ohio in the northwestern corner of Pennsylvania has a climate influenced by Lake Erie, however.
Yeah, big time. We get what's called the lake effect snow coming off of Lake Erie. So among the places that get the highest level of snowfall in the entire United States is this whole section right along here. Buffalo, New York, up here, all the way down Erie, Pennsylvania there, Ashtabula, Ohio, and then around Cleveland. The area around Mentor, Ohio, which is where President Garfield's from, gets hammered with snow. We could be down here where I live and get 2 or 3 inches, and they could get 1.5 feet of snow just 30 miles away from there. That's how much difference it is, that lake effect snow.
However, and southwestern Pennsylvania's climate can be influenced by the nearby Atlantic Ocean. Pennsylvania is not a coastal state, though. Both get 4 seasons, and with the exceptions of the mountainous areas, both are generally warmer in the summer the further south you go, and colder in the winter the further north you go. The Appalachian Plateau, a rugged region made up of dissected plateaus, runs right through both states. Both have the same type of natural disasters. You know, the occasional severe thunderstorm, floods, and blizzards. Both also can get tornadoes. The biggest industries in both are the same. That'd be healthcare, manufacturing, retail, and education.
touching on the tornado thing for just a second, in 1985, I remember this vividly because the sky was such a weird color that night. One of the worst tornado outbreaks in history strikes northeast Ohio and goes into western Pennsylvania. We had an F5 tornado, which is the most powerful you can have, touch down, run through Niles, which is my wife's hometown. Killed, I think, 8 people in Niles, killed like 40 people overall, was on the ground for like 47 miles. It was a massive tornado. The street next to the street that my wife lived on was completely wiped out, and it just hopped over her street. But she heard the tornado outside. It was bad. It was real bad.
Agriculture is also big in both. The median age is similar in both. Both have a similar number of residents who identify as Christian and, quote, not religious. However, more consider themselves Roman Catholic in Pennsylvania and more consider themselves evangelical Protestant in Ohio.
And that is a big, big difference because in terms of how people vote, things like that. Roman Catholics a lot more vote Democrat, whereas evangelical Protestants tend to vote more Republican, which is why you see Ohio tend to lean more red than Pennsylvania does.
Before we get into the differences between the two states, I need to shave.
That's random.
Which works out pretty well.
Oh,
since
that's
this
why.
video is
Okay, it's an ad.
By Harry's. Harry's is a personal care brand that has reinvented the way you shave, helping you to shave in a premium, hassle-free way. We've got this shave gel that is phenomenal. It has aloe. I'm typically not a fan of shaving. I'm not just saying.
Can I just say this about Mr. Beat? He's a pretty buff guy, right? I mean, I'm a skinny dude. I'm really skinny, except for I got a little belly because I'm 44 and I don't eat very good. But he's a pretty buff guy. Good for him.
Just because they sponsor my video. It's a nice shave. All right, got the shaving gel on my face. Now I'm going to shave the little hairs off my face. I might even shave some nose hairs. Their German manufactured blades are sharper than ever. Oh! Don't try that at home. And they're still the same low price of $2 each. Look at that, it gets all the hair. And it just makes shaving a much more enjoyable experience. Nice! Really nice. See, I can even get the nose hairs. Help Harry support great causes as they give 1% of their global sales to non-profit organizations that provide mental health care to men, veterans, and LGBTQ plus youths in need. Redeem your trial set for just $3 when you go to harrys.com/MrBeat. You'll get a 5-blade razor, weighted handle, a travel cover, and their foaming shave gel. It's an incredibly great deal, but act fast while supplies last. All right, that's better. So what about their differences? First of all, Pennsylvania has been around longer. Yeah. In fact, it was one of the original 13 colonies. Yeah, let's get into some history here. Humans have lived in the area for thousands of years. At the time of European arrival, the dominant American Indian tribes in modern-day Pennsylvania were the Lenape Delaware, the Munsee Delaware, Susquehannock, Erie, Iroquois, and Shawnee.
Wouldn't be vlogging through history video if I didn't mention my ancestors, and one of my ancestors was a Lenape Indian chief named Big Thunder, who had a daughter named Bright Lightning. And the story in our family goes, and I found a book that backs this up, that I had a ancestor who was Swedish named Hendrik Coleman. And Hendrik Coleman settled in New Sweden, which is the area around what is today Philadelphia. And there was a rebellion against English rule when the English took over the area. And he as a translator who knew the Indian dialects, went to go live with the Lenape Indians, ended up impregnating the daughter of the chief. And so I descend from their daughter that they had together. Anna Hendrick's daughter was her name.
The dominant American Indian tribes in modern-day Ohio were also the Erie and Shawnee, but additionally the Kickapoo. Many of the first Europeans to settle the area were fur traders who regularly traded with the aforementioned tribes.
Now, in Ohio, long before, like the Shawnee tended to be in the south. We have Shawnee State University down in Portsmouth on the Ohio River. Erie were more in the north. But far before that, we had what were called the mound builders. Folks like the Hopewell Indians. And so a lot, especially in a lot of the areas of southern Ohio, in this area here, like in Adams County, there are Indian mounds. There's the Great Serpent Mound in southern Ohio, but those were the Hopewell and the there was another Indian tribe, I can't remember the name, but we learn about them in Ohio history growing up.
The French were mostly the ones who traded in the area, but the Dutch, English, and Swedes also traded in parts of modern-day eastern Pennsylvania. Throughout the 1600s, this happened mostly peacefully, but there were the Beaver Wars, which saw the Iroquois teaming up with the English and Dutch, and on the other side, a bunch of Indian nations teaming up with the French. In 1655, the Dutch took over future southeastern Pennsylvania, but within a couple decades, the English had full control of it. Meanwhile, modern-day western Pennsylvania and Ohio were claimed by France as part of New France. On March 4th, 1681, Charles II of England granted a dude named William Penn the province of Pennsylvania to settle debt that he owed to William's father.
So Pennsylvania was a debt payoff. So Sylvania just means woods, and so Pennsylvania means Penn's woods. Transylvania means, like trans woods, which was actually originally going to be the name of Kentucky, was Transylvania.
Hey, Charles even named it after his dad. Dang. Sylvania, by the way, is Latin for woodlands. William, who, by the way, was embarrassed by the new name of his colony, founded it as a place of religious freedom that mostly attracted Quakers, Germans, Scots, Irish frontiersmen, and others fleeing religious persecution and wars.
And you can see this in some of the names of the areas like around Harrisburg, and kind of as you start to get into central Pennsylvania from the east, as you can see the settling happen, you see a lot of Scots-Irish influence. You see a lot of Irish names, but you also see a little bit of French, like Dauphin County, which is named after the Dauphin, which is the son of the King of France, the heir. But you see a lot of Scots-Irish names in there. Chambersburg, Pennsylvania was settled by the Chambers family, which I descend from, which were Scots-Irish. They were Ulster Scots. So you see a lot of that in central Pennsylvania. Western Pennsylvania very heavily, and eastern Pennsylvania heavily settled by Germans. And a lot of those Germans came into northeast Ohio from the area south of Pittsburgh, Washington County, Pennsylvania.
Penn today is also known for his fair treatment of American Indian tribes who lived in the colony. He founded Pennsylvania's capital, Philadelphia, in 1682. Philadelphia would quickly become a major port and commercial city. Throughout the 1700s, more and more colonists would move further west, encroaching on both American Indian claims and French claims. The British called the area west of Pennsylvania, quote, Ohio country. The name Ohio comes from the Seneca word Ohio, which translates to Great River.
Great River.
What great river were they referring to? The Ohio River, of course. Anyway, a bunch of folks from Virginia created the Ohio Company to settle Ohio country and trade with American Indian tribes there. The problem was France was already there, yo. However, the British won what became known as the French and Indian War. And then all of Pennsylvania and Ohio country were now part of Great Britain. During the years between the French and Indian War and the American War of Independence, Pennsylvania's borders changed a few times.
Now, I want to go back to this map for a second. I don't know if you'll talk about this or not, but here in northeast Ohio, the Connecticut Western Reserve was this area right here. It was called the Connecticut Western Reserve, and you see the influence of that to this day. I grew up in Trumbull County, Ohio, which is right here. Jonathan Trumbull was the mayor, or was the governor of Connecticut. I grew up in Wethersfield Township, which was named after Wethersfield, Connecticut. So there's Connecticut names all over the place in northeast Ohio. It was divided into these townships and ranges that are all the exact same size. They're all, I think, 5 miles by 5 miles square. In fact, Trumbull County is the only perfectly square county in all of Ohio.
His borders changed a few times. Famously, Jeremiah Mason and Charles Dixon drew up the Mason-Dixon line, which officially became the southern border, and over time, an informal boundary between free states in the north and slave states in the south. Ohio country never had many slaves, but it did have a lot of violence and turmoil in the years between the French and Indian War and the American War of Independence. But during the American War of Independence, Pennsylvania saw much more violence and turmoil. Pennsylvania, well, Philadelphia specifically, was where the new country of the United States began, where the First and Second Continental Congresses met, and where the Declaration of Independence was signed. In addition to Philadelphia, Lancaster and York even temporarily served as capitals during the war. After independence was secured, the Congress of the Confederation continued to meet in Philadelphia, and it remained the country's capital for a few years.
An important thing to note, and I've mentioned this before, in Pennsylvania, the town is called Lancaster. If you call it Lancaster, you will hear about it from people who live in eastern Pennsylvania.
That Congress of the Confederation created the Northwest Territory in 1787, and a dude named Rufus Putnam led a group of Revolutionary veterans to settle in Ohio the next year.
Marietta is where it all began, and we have a Putnam County in Ohio. So in the aftermath of the American Revolution, one of the unspoken causes of the American Revolution was all of that land west of the Appalachian Mountains. You had that line from 1763 where the British government had a pretty good relationship with the Native Americans. And so they mainly limited the colonists from going across. They couldn't settle past the Appalachian Mountains, which meant the whole western half of Pennsylvania and all of Ohio was off limits to anything except for licensed traders, fur traders, things like that. But winning the American Revolution meant that they were no longer bound by that. And one of the ways the new country rewarded the men who fought in the Revolution was large land grants. All this new land they had west of the Appalachians. So, Kentucky, Ohio, even places like Indiana and Tennessee, these are all places that get settled by all of these Revolutionary War veterans who are looking for new land. And so they start encroaching on Native American territory, and you have a lot of big issues with that.
Marietta, Ohio became the first European-American permanent U.S. settlement in Northwest Territory. Many American Indian tribes still lived out there, and treaties were broken as they were pushed further and further west due to American encroachment on their lands. During the Northwest Indian War of 1785 to 1795, a confederation of tribes united to fight the Americans and their American Indian allies. That confederation of tribes lost and had to give up lots of territory, including most of modern-day Ohio. As I hinted at earlier, Pennsylvania was one of the first states in the Union, but that didn't mean it didn't also have some chaos during those years. In the early 1790s, a bunch of farmers in western Pennsylvania organized
Whiskey
to not
Rebellion.
pay the federal tax on certain alcoholic beverages, even when federal authorities showed up in person trying to collect them. This became known as the Whiskey Rebellion.
And the reason this was such a big deal is because at the time the federal government had very few ways in which to collect taxes. There was no federal income tax. The main ways the federal government collected taxes was on import taxes like tariffs, which I know Mr. Beat's no fan of, and then what we would today call a sin tax on things like the production of whiskey and the sale of whiskey. And one of the main areas in the country where people produced their own whiskey was southwestern Pennsylvania. And so this area kind of south of Pittsburgh is the focal point for the Whiskey Rebellion. And you've got the President of the United States, George Washington, and the Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, both donning their uniforms and leading an army to go confront these rebellious farmers. And it doesn't really turn into anything real bloody. A few people died. But it's interesting, a very different time.
And it only ended when freaking President George Washington himself and 15,000 soldiers showed up to put it down. By the end of 1801, Ohio's population had swelled to 45,000, and it prepared for a path to statehood. When it did become a state, 14 months later, it rejected slavery. And for many decades afterward, runaway slaves would cross the Ohio River into Ohio as they escaped the South.
Yeah, remember, until the American Civil War, Ohio bordered Virginia. This is all Virginia right here. I live in northeast Ohio, and I live like a 35-minute drive from what was then Virginia. People forget how far north slavery was legal up until the Civil War.
45,000 people? That's cute. Around that time, Pennsylvania had around 650,000 people and was the second largest state in the Union by population, really having a strong influence on the rest of the country. Over the following decades, only New York would dominate more. In fact, only New York had more electoral votes than Pennsylvania between the years of 1796 all the way up to 1960. From 1811 to 1813, Ohio found itself impacted by Tecumseh's War between Shawnee leader Tecumseh and his Confederacy and the United States. It overlapped with the War of 1812 with the British. After it was all over, pretty much every American Indian tribe had lost control of the Great Lakes region, and things calmed down in both states over the next several decades, until the American Civil War, that is. At that time, both Pennsylvania and Ohio were the second and third largest states in the country by population. Both stayed with the Union, of course, and played critical roles in the war.
Yeah, only state with more people at that time is New York. But interestingly, even though these states are right next to each other, they were pretty much in different theaters of the war. Ohio was really a part of the Western theater of the American Civil War. And whereas almost all of the Pennsylvania troops fought in the Eastern theater in Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, fighting against Robert E. Lee, the Army of the Potomac, that area, a good bit of Ohio's troops fought under Grant and Sherman and those men in Mississippi, Tennessee, Georgia. Very, very different focus of the war for those two states.
And critical Union leaders came from both states. While Ohio didn't see much action during that war, Pennsylvania was where the biggest, bloodiest, and most famous battle took place, the Battle of Gettysburg, which we now see as a major turning point of the Civil War.
And as I will always say, till I'm blue in the face, till I am dead and in the grave, Gettysburg was not the largest battle of the American Civil War. It was the bloodiest battle. It had the most casualties. It was not the largest. I think it was probably the fourth largest. If we're talking about men on the field, Fredericksburg was the largest battle of the American Civil War.
For the rest of the 1800s, industrialization dramatically changed both states, and both became economic powerhouses that most of the rest of the country came to depend on. Between the Civil War and the end of the 1800s, the population of both states doubled, and that rapid growth continued for the first half of the 1900s. Since the 1960s, the growth has cooled off as many factories in both states have shut down, hence the aforementioned term.
Hey, there's Youngstown right there. So, yeah, that's a big, big deal in this area. In the 1970s, right around the time that I was born, a lot of those steel mills shut down. I think they called it like Black Thursday or something like that. I don't remember which day of the week it was, but it was black, whatever that day was, when they all shut down. Youngstown Sheet and Tube was, when that shut down, that was devastating to this local economy. And honestly, even in my 20s and 30s, the talk here was always about how they could bring back the manufacturing jobs. And I think it's only in the last decade or so that people have accepted those manufacturing jobs aren't coming back, and they've started to try and find other ways, to focus, medical and technology and things like that. But yeah, I mean, this is a big part of our identity here, is the whole Rust Belt identity.
Rust Belt. However, the economies of both today have diversified quite a bit and have attracted a lot of business opportunities due to a lower cost of living compared to other places in the country.
True.
Although, according to Forbes magazine, Pennsylvania is currently a better state for business. Although it obviously varies from city to city, overall, Ohio has a lower cost of living than Pennsylvania. Ohioans do pay more in taxes overall. That said, Pennsylvania has the highest gas tax in the country.
Pennsylvania also has an inspection law with their car, which can be really annoying and really expensive. When I lived in Pennsylvania, at one point we had a Blazer, and everything worked. The car worked perfectly. It didn't have any rust. It looked good. But there was a problem with the door hinge. I mean, the door shut just fine, but when they inspected it, they found this problem with the door hinge, and it cost us like $1,000 to get our door hinge fixed because it wouldn't pass inspection. We don't deal with that in Ohio.
Okay, let's see what other differences. Oh yeah, well this surprised me a bit. Pennsylvania is bigger, but just by about 9%. Ohio's population is a little bit more spread out. Pennsylvania's is more in the eastern and western parts. I'm sure the mountains have a lot to do with it. Pennsylvania definitely has more mountains than Ohio. The Appalachians run right through it. Driving across the state on Interstate 80 is one of the most scenic stretches of interstate in the country.
80 runs all the way from New York City to San Francisco, and I grew up, like a mile from Interstate 80. 80's kind of a part of who we are, too.
Most of the state is rugged in one way or the other, whereas parts of Ohio are fairly flat, relatively speaking. While both get plenty of precipitation, Pennsylvania gets a bit more overall. Pennsylvania has more residents who were born in a foreign country. Pennsylvania has a higher median household income. It also has a lower poverty rate, or at least it did back in 2019. However, Ohio has a lower violent crime rate. More Pennsylvanians have college degrees, although Ohio spends more per student on education. More Pennsylvanians are members of a union.
Now, I find that education stat really interesting because Ohio and Pennsylvania have a very different function as far as how they fund their schools. I was actually elected to a school board in Pennsylvania, but moved before I was able to serve. In Pennsylvania, at least within some parameters, if the school district needs more money, both school districts, I think, are primarily both schools, states' school districts are primarily funded by local property taxes. But in Pennsylvania, if they need more money for the schools, they can actually they can vote to the school board can just raise the property taxes to a degree. In Ohio, we vote on a tax levy. So, if our school district where I live wants to bring in more money to fund, a new building project or something like that, we would vote on that as a community. We'd vote on whether or not to raise our own property taxes. And sometimes we have to vote to renew those taxes. And a lot of times what happens is if it doesn't pass, the school will start making threats like, well, we're going to have to eliminate sports, we're going to eliminate busing, and they'll put the levy back on the ballot, and usually after 3 or 4 attempts, they'll finally get it passed.
Ohio borders 5 states. Pennsylvania borders 6. The southern border of Ohio is the mighty Ohio River, and the northern border of both states is the aforementioned Lake Erie. Pennsylvania, just barely though. This 300 square mile northwestern section of the state is known as the Erie Triangle. It originally was disputed land. New York and even Connecticut and Massachusetts all made claims on it, but ultimately the federal government took over the area and sold it to Pennsylvania so that the state would have access to a freshwater port on Lake Erie.
Presque Isle, beautiful beach, a lot of nice things there. I believe Erie is the 3rd largest city in Pennsylvania after Philadelphia and Pittsburgh.
But yeah, anyway, the Delaware River makes up the eastern border of Pennsylvania. Ohio has one more national park than Pennsylvania. Yeah, Pennsylvania doesn't have a national park, but it has more historical landmarks.
Yeah.
8 American presidents were born and or spent most of their life in Ohio.
Yeah, so this is one of those interesting areas of dispute for us. Because Virginia and Ohio both claim 8 presidents, tying us for the most. But one of those is shared by both, and that's William Henry Harrison, who was born in Virginia, but is claimed by Ohio. He's actually buried down near Cincinnati. But you could say that about a lot of these presidents. Grant, born and raised in Ohio, went to West Point from Ohio, is claimed by Illinois, even though he only lived in Galena for like a year. He's buried in New York. We've got Hayes, who I think was always from Ohio. Garfield, a Northeast Ohio guy. Benjamin Harrison actually is buried in Indianapolis. He was, I think, a senator from Indiana. May have been governor of Indiana, too. William McKinley is another Northeast Ohio guy. He's from Niles, my wife's hometown. William Howard Taft, Ohio. Warren Harding, Ohio. We haven't had one since, and I think that's because Harding was so bad.
American presidents were born and or spent most of their life in Ohio. You know who else is from Ohio? Geography Joe. who is from Cleveland, actually.
Yay,
And
Northeast Ohio.
This is actually a collaboration with Geography Joe. He has just released a video about East Cleveland, and it's on his channel right now. Go check it out after this one and stuff. Now, Ohioans might disagree with this, but Ohio has better roads overall. And let's face it, Ohio also has a cooler, much more unique flag. It's the only American flag that's not rectangular. I'm sorry, Pennsylvania. Ohio has the world's largest cuckoo clock, drumsticks, and basket.
That's the Longaberger. I think it's been sold since then, but Longaberger's headquarters is that basket-looking building. We also, and I don't know if you'll get to it, we also, we have the Wright brothers, we have Thomas Edison, we've got Neil Armstrong, we've got John Glenn, we've got pretty much all of the really good generals from the American Civil War. So that
basket is just a building, but there's also this basket. But Pennsylvania has some really big Big Macs in its Big Mac Museum in North Huntingdon. In several Pennsylvania towns, they celebrate Halloween earlier than October 31st. Pennsylvania has Old Forge pizza. Ohio has Steubenville-style pizza. Convenience stores...
All right, I gotta say this. I live an hour from Steubenville. I've never heard of Steubenville-style pizza. That is a new concept to me. We have Wedgwood pizza, which is amazing.
Pennsylvania actually have good food. There is a bit of a civil war between phenomenal convenience stores in Pennsylvania. In the West, Sheetz dominates, and the East,
Love
Wawa
Sheetz
dominates. Ohio has some Sheetz stores, but not Wawa stores. But it does have Casey's.
Yeah, we don't have Wawa.
So I guess that makes up for it.
And Casey's we don't have where I live. That must be a Southern Ohio thing, kind of like Skyline Chili.
A lot of the differences between the two states are because of Eastern Pennsylvania existing. Eastern Pennsylvania actually has more in common with the East Coast states. I mean, Philly has more in common with New York and Washington, D.C. than the three major Ohio cities, and even Pittsburgh. Central and Western Pennsylvania definitely are much more similar to Ohio. I'll conclude by showing you this map. As you can see, both are not that far from the exciting East Coast, yet have quite a bit lower cost of living. Not just the East Coast. Former Ohio Governor John Kasich once said, quote, "We're within 600 miles of 60% of America." And he was right.
Yeah.
Both are so close to everything, yet both have a reasonable cost of living. Better come take advantage of these prices before the area heats up again, baby.
All right, that was really well done. You can't argue with the fact that Mr. Beat knows his stuff. He does his research. And, for a guy from, I think he's from Kansas, who I presume never lived in Ohio or Pennsylvania, I feel like he's got a really good grasp on these two states that I have called home and know so much about. So, well done. I enjoyed that. I'll probably have to dive into some more of his comparison videos. Let me know your thoughts. If you're from Ohio or Pennsylvania, especially, I would love to hear from you about all of that. Use the comment section below. Make sure you check out his original content. I'll give you a link in the description so you can check out his stuff. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.